They enrolled a human child as a joke. He rewrote their rules of war. The Grand Adjudication Chamber of the Aegis Interstellar War College was a place of immense gravity, a silent void carved from the heart of a captured asteroid. A single, monolithic table of polished obsidian dominated the space, its flawless surface reflecting the silent dance of holographic displays. These projections detailed the combat statistics and genetic profiles of the galaxy's most promising warrior applicants. Here, under the cold gaze of 1,000 star systems visible through the chamber's armored viewport, decisions were made that shaped the military destiny of generations. Commandant Vorn of the Kthar Hive, a towering being of Black Chitin, and undisputed authority, presided over the final review. His secondary manipulators moved with practiced efficiency, flicking through candidate profiles. Saurian shock troopers bred for conquest. Signian telepaths capable of breaking in enemies. Axiomatic strategists who saw battlefields as mere equations. Each approval was a dull, satisfying thud that echoed in the hallowed silence. The process was brutally methodical until a junior adjutant, a reedy xylopod whose photosynthetic fronds trembled with nervousness, approached the obsidian table. "Commandant," he quavered, presenting a flickering data slate. A flag has been raised by the system. A clerical routing error, it seems." Vorn took the slate, his primary claws clicking with impatience. He scanned the contents, and then a low, rumbling sound began deep in his thorax. It was the Kthar equivalent of a dry chuckle. He projected the application for the entire board to see. "Behold, esteemed colleagues," he announced, his deep voice dripping with a condescending amusement that was far more insulting than outright mockery. "A new applicant from the Terran primitives." The holographic display lit up with the image of a small, pale-skinned mammal with an unruly shock of brown hair and an expression of cheerful curiosity. "Candidate, Leo Magnus. Species, human." Vorn read the data aloud, savoring each word like a fine delicacy. "Noteworthy accomplishments. Captain of the Newton's Nightmares Scholastic Robotics Club. First place, Sol System Regional Science Fair. Project title, Microremediation of Hydrocarbon-Contaminated Soil." A wave of guttural, clicking laughter rolled across the chamber. A child who played with fungi and toy robots had applied to the most prestigious, most lethal military academy in the galaxy. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity was exquisite. Internally, Vorn savored the political opportunity. The humans, with their loud demands for recognition and their laughably brief history of interstellar travel, needed a public lesson in humility. This was perfect. "This is not an error," Vorn declared, his voice cutting through the laughter and settling into a tone of final authority. "It is a gift. We shall make him our grand jest. We will accept the child." He leaned back, his multiple eyes glinting. "Let the galaxy bear witness to the true measure of human martial prowess. This will be a lesson they, and their deluded advocates, will not soon forget." The board members signaled their unanimous, gleeful assent. The joke was set. The primary landing grounds of the Aegis War College were a masterpiece of calculated intimidation. Gargantuan spires of obsidian clawed at the alien sky, each hung with the battle-worn banners of legendary warrior species. The air itself seemed to crackle with disciplined energy as sleek, brutalist military transports disembarked their cadets. Hulking Saurians, graceful Signians, and imposing Kthar warriors, all moved with the grim purpose of beings bred for conflict. It was a place designed to crush the spirit before training even began. Into this arena of martial grandeur descended a small, civilian model shuttle, the SS Curiosity. Its rounded edges and cheerful white and blue paint scheme looked so comically out of place, it was like a child's toy dropped into a nest of predators. The vessel settled with a quiet hiss that was utterly lost in the thunderous reverberations of the military craft around it. The ramp lowered, and out stepped Leo Magnus. He was, if anything, smaller than his file had suggested. A shock of brown hair refused to be tamed by the harsh gravity, and the standard-issue cadet boots he wore were so oversized they looked like weights strapped to his ankles. Yet, he carried his small duffel bag with a jaunty swing and surveyed the intimidating plaza not with fear, but with wide-eyed wonder. His grin was a small, bright anomaly in a universe of stern glares. He didn't get 5 paces before a shadow fell over him. Vortak, a Kthar cadet whose chitinous shoulders were as wide as Leo was tall, loomed over the human child. His serrated mandibles clicked, a sound of profound disdain. "Are you lost, larva?" the Kthar rumbled, his voice a low-frequency vibration that Leo felt in his bones. The civilian exchange campus is on the western continent. This is a place for warriors. Beside Vortak, a sleek, chrome onyx being from the axiomatic confluence glided to a halt. Its optical sensors, a series of pulsing blue lights, focused on Leo. "Correction, Vortak," it stated in a perfectly synthesized, emotionless tone. "Subject is wearing a cadet uniform. My designation is Axiom, Beta. I have calculated the probability of a juvenile Terran, with baseline physical metrics, surviving the first training cycle. The result is 0.0014%. This is either an elaborate psychological warfare exercise or a catastrophic administrative error." Leo Magnus looked from the towering insectoid to the logic-driven automaton. His grin, impossibly, got wider. "Nope, Leo Magnus," he chirped, shifting his duffel bag on his shoulder. "Here for the War College. Hope I'm not late for the big show." He snapped off a salute with surprising crispness, his small hand arcing through the air with perfect military form. Vortak stared. The gesture was correct. The posture was correct. But the being performing it was fundamentally, cosmically wrong. The Kthar's warrior mind, trained to categorize threats and dismiss trivialities, could not process the data. This small, soft creature was not a threat, yet it showed no fear. It was an equation that did not balance. Axiom, Beta, for its part, went completely still. Internally, its logic cores were experiencing a cascade failure. The human's presence was a statistical impossibility, yet its cheerful confidence was a behavioral paradox. The input data was invalid. Logic dictated it should be dismissed, but observation demanded it be analyzed. Error. Error. Recalculating. Leo, oblivious to the existential crises he was causing, simply looked past them at the towering obsidian spires. To him, this wasn't an intimidating fortress. It was the greatest, most complex, most wonderfully fascinating puzzle box he had ever seen. He couldn't wait to start taking it apart. The orientation hall was designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Tiers of stark metal seating rose into the oppressive gloom, encircling a central podium where a lone figure stood. He was Instructor Primus Kalen of the Saurian hegemony, a being whose reptilian species had carved out their empire through methodical, brutal conquest. His scales were the color of dried blood, and his voice, when it came, was a dry rasp that scraped at the nerves. "You are the select," Kalen began, his unblinking yellow eyes sweeping across the assembly of cadets. "The best of your respective worlds. But being the best on your world means nothing here. Here, you are larvae. Unproven. Unworthy." He paused, letting the weight of his contempt settle over the room. Leo, sitting between the still calculating Axiom, Beta, and a deeply uncomfortable Vortak, listened with rapt attention, as if Kalen were a museum guide explaining a particularly interesting exhibit. "At this academy," Kalen hissed, "we do not coddle. We forge. The process is stressful. Last year's class had a 42% rate of significant injury. The graduation rate was 72%. We are proud of these numbers. They prove that only the strongest will survive. The weak will be broken and discarded. That is the only promise we make." A heavy silence filled the hall. The threat was clear, the terms of their new existence laid bare. It was in this moment of collective, disciplined fear that a small hand shot into the air. Kalen froze mid-sentence. His head, a wedge of scales and teeth, swiveled slowly until his gaze fixed on Leo Magnus. A low growl rumbled in his chest. In 4 centuries of giving this speech, no one had ever interrupted him. "Yes." Kalen's voice was dangerously soft. "Excuse me, sir? Quick question." Leo's voice was clear and carried surprisingly well in the vast hall. "That 28% casualty rate, does that account for the human learning curve, or is that a fixed number? Just trying to get a baseline for my own progress reports." A collective, galaxy-spanning intake of breath seemed to suck the air from the room. Vortak visibly flinched. Axiom. Beta's optical sensors began to strobe faintly. Kalen's jaw opened slightly, revealing rows of serrated teeth. The human child was not asking if he would survive. He was asking for clarification on the metrics of his expected failure so he could track his outperformance. The sheer, unmitigated audacity was an existential slap in the face to the Academy's entire philosophy. Kalen's fury was so profound, it rendered him speechless. He simply pointed a single, taloned finger at Leo. "You. Arena. Now." The combat assessment arena was a circle of packed, metallic sand under the glare of harsh white lights. The pairing was no surprise. Leo stood on one side, looking like a lost child, while Vortak took the other, his massive frame radiating humiliation and a grim determination to end this farce quickly and professionally. "Try not to break the specimen," Instructor Primus Kalen snarled from the sidelines. "The Inquisitor wishes to study him intact." Vortak nodded, settling into a classic Cthar combat stance. It was low, powerful, an immovable object preparing to become an unstoppable force. He would not be cruel, but he would be decisive. He lunged that it should have been over in a second. Vortak's charge was a blur of motion and power, a strike that had shattered armored opponents. But it hit nothing. Leo wasn't there. He hadn't dodged or leaped in any conventional sense. He had simply shifted, a small, economical movement of the hips and a slight pivot on his heel, and Vortak's devastating attack thundered past, striking empty air. Internally, Leo wasn't seeing a warrior. He was seeing a physics problem. Massive object, high velocity, forward momentum concentrated on a narrow lead leg. Unstable, Vortak spun, confusion warring with anger. He swung a massive arm in a sweeping arc designed to pulp anything in its path. Again, Leo was gone. He ducked under the swing, his movement so fluid it looked less like a martial art and more like a dance. He was too close for Vortak to bring his strength to bear. Overcommits on the swing, Leo's mind supplied, calm as a summer afternoon. Rotational force pulls his center of gravity off axis. Leverage point. Rear ankle. As Vortak struggled to regain his balance from the missed blow, Leo simply stuck out one of his oversized boots. It was not a kick. It was not a trip in the traditional sense. It was a perfectly timed, perfectly placed obstacle. Vortak's own momentum did the rest. The giant Cthar warrior, champion of his caste, tumbled over the tiny human's foot and crashed to the metallic sand with a deafening clang of chitin. The arena was dead silent. Leo stepped back, brushing dust from his hands, and offered a hand down to the utterly bewildered Cthar. "Good match. You have a really powerful swing, but you put too much weight on your lead foot. It leaves you wide open to a leg sweep." He smiled kindly. "No offense." On the sidelines, Instructor Primus Kalen stared, his jaw hanging open. Vortak did not take the offered hand. He was staring at the small human, his multifaceted eyes trying to comprehend a reality that his warrior instincts told him was impossible. He hadn't been beaten by strength, or speed, or even skill. He had been beaten by math. The Crucible was the heart of the War College's training grounds, a spherical chamber of impossible technology where full immersion simulations pushed cadets to their breaking point. The scenario for the first years was infamous. A 12-hour survival test on a holographic replica of Xylos 7, a jungle moon so lethal that the Galactic Council had declared it a quarantine zone. The flora was carnivorous. The fauna were hyperpredators. The very air could be toxic in the lower valleys. It was a test of pure instinct and endurance. Cadets were plugged in one by one. Their vital signs, displayed on the main control room monitor, showed a predictable pattern. A spike of adrenaline, followed by a steady increase in stress hormones. As the hostile environment wore them down, most failed before the 6-hour mark. Their virtual consciousness safely extracted moments before a simulated death. Leo Magnus entered the simulation at 0800 hours. At 11:47, his completion beacon activated. He had finished in under 4 hours. He emerged from the simulation pod looking slightly disheveled and smelling faintly of ozone, but otherwise completely unharmed. He was humming. The debriefing was held in a quiet, sterile observation room, conducted by Inquisitor Lyrael of the Signian Ascendancy. She was an ancient, graceful being, her form a swirl of pearlescent light contained within a vaguely humanoid energy field. Her species was known for its deep empathy and its ability to perceive the subtle emotional and cognitive states of others. She was chosen for these debriefings because her calm presence could soothe even the most traumatized cadet. Cadet Magnus, Lyrael began, her voice a soft, melodic chime. Your performance in the Crucible was exceptional. The log shows you established a secure shelter within the first hour. Can you explain your method? Sure, Leo said cheerfully. The big cat things with the sonic scream were the main problem, right? So I found the crash scout drone simulation near the waterfall, pulled its power core and comms chip, and jury-rigged a sonic dampener. They couldn't find me after that. It was pretty straightforward. Lyrael's energy field shimmered slightly. Scavenging and improvising advanced technology under duress was a high-level skill, but not unheard of. A remarkable display of ingenuity, cadet. However, the log also shows a significant anomaly regarding the local flora. Specifically, the field of ravener vines surrounding your shelter. They are programmed to react to any biological movement. Oh, the grabby vines? Leo asked, his face lighting up with genuine interest. Yeah, their targeting code was super simple. I managed to access the local environmental interface through the drone's comms chip. The vine's logic was just a basic if/then loop keyed to motion and heat signatures. He shrugged. I just added a few except when exceptions to the code. So they'd ignore me but grab anything else that came too close. It wasn't hard. It's a lot like the programming for my robotics club back home, just with more teeth. The Inquisitor went utterly still. The gentle, melodic hum that always surrounded her ceased. The very light of her being seemed to dim for a fraction of a second. She had expected a story of clever evasion, of hiding or outsmarting the simulations. Threats. She was prepared for a prodigy. She was not prepared for this. This was not survival. This was not ingenuity. This was a fundamental rewriting of the simulation's reality from within. The child hadn't played the game. He had hacked the game's engine while the game was running, using tools that shouldn't exist to perform high-level biodigital engineering on the fly. He had weaponized the jungle itself. Cadet, Inquisitor Lyrael said, and for the first time in her long existence, her voice was not perfectly calm. It was thin, strained, and laced with an emotion she had not felt in millennia. It was a cold, sharp, and deeply profound fear. The joke was over. The war room of the Aegis College was a place rarely used, reserved for crises that threatened the institution itself. Its shielded walls absorbed all sound, creating a heavy, oppressive silence. Around a circular holographic table, the senior faculty had gathered. The mood was funereal. Commandant Thorn stood at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence replaced by a grim tension. The chitin of his carapace seemed less lustrous, his movements stiff. The grand jest had soured, curdling into something that tasted like fear. He activated the central display, which lit up with Leo Magnus' profile. We are here to discuss the Terran. Hitchvorn began, his voice a low growl. The anomaly. Inquisitor Lyrael, your report. The pearlescent form of the Signian Inquisitor drifted to the center of the room. The usual serene calm that surrounded her was fractured, replaced by an energy that felt like a plucked nerve. Commandant, colleagues. Her voice chimed, though the melody was strained. My analysis of Cadet Magnus is troubling. Following his performance in the Crucible, I conducted a full-spectrum neural scan. A complex, shifting image of a human. Brain appeared above the table, alight with impossible patterns of energy. His mind does not process problems linearly, as ours do, Lyrael explained. Standard cognition follows a path from data, to analysis, to conclusion. His mind, it appears to operate on a quantum probability model. It does not see one solution, or even a dozen. It perceives all possible solutions simultaneously as a wave of probabilities, and his consciousness simply collapses the wave on the most optimal outcome. A murmur of disbelief went through the assembled masters of war. Instructor Primus Kalen, the Saurian, let out a low hiss. That is the description of a battle computer, not an organic mind. Precisely, Lyrael affirmed. He does not learn tactics. He perceives them. The biological mechanism for this is unknown. It violates several known principles of neurology. Before the weight of this could fully settle, Another figure spoke. It was Drill Master Regath, the hulking Kthar weapons instructor, whose voice was the sound of grinding rock. He had been a being of few words and much action for his entire life. His mind is not the only thing that violates our principles, Regath rumbled, his gaze fixed on the table. He came to my weapons range. He took a Vorin pulse pistol, a weapon that requires compensating for quantum drift, and fired a perfect grouping at 200 meters. Without a targeting link. He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he critiqued our combat training AI. He called the Mark IV's tactical logic lazy. Regath looked up, and his multifaceted eyes met Siege-Vorn's. And the worst part, Commandant, is that he was right. He identified 3 exploitable loops in its code that our own engineers have overlooked. For a decade, the confession hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Lyrael's report was abstract, theoretical. Regath's was a practical, humiliating fact. This child had outthought their most advanced tactical AI after observing it for less than 10 minutes. The gathered faculty looked at each other, the same dawning horror reflected in every set of alien eyes. This was not a prodigy. Prodigies excel within an existing system. Leo Magnus operated outside of it entirely. He was a walking paradigm shift. Commandant Siege-Vorn felt a cold dread seep into his very marrow. His joke, his arrogant political maneuver to humiliate the humans, had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He had opened a door, expecting a mouse to wander through, and had instead invited in a creature whose nature he could not begin to comprehend. That he looked at the face of the smiling child on the holographic display, and then at the faces of his terrified colleagues. This is not a student, Siege-Vorn said, his voice barely a whisper. This is an anomaly. And it was an anomaly he had personally unleashed upon a galaxy built on order, predictability, and rules. All the things the human child seemed to view as mere suggestions. Commandant Siege-Vorn's private office was a reflection of his own nature. It was stark, imposing, and brutally functional. There were no decorations, only trophies of past conquests mounted on the bulkhead and a single, throne-like chair facing a quantum communications pedestal. It was in this severe chamber that he accepted the priority call from the Vexillor Imperium. The air shimmered, and the holographic image of Imperator Traxon solidified before him. The Vexillor leader was a being of sharp angles and cold light. His armored form was a testament to his species' rigid devotion to order. His voice, when it came, was a synthesized monotone, entirely devoid of emotion, which made his words infinitely more terrifying. Commandant Siege-Vorn, the hologram stated. It was a declaration, not a greeting. The Vexillor Imperium has been monitoring communications from your institution. We are concerned. Imperator, Siege-Vorn began, forcing a tone of respectful authority. The Aegis War College operates within all galactic accords. I assure you. We are not concerned with accords, Traxon interrupted, the slightest flicker of his optical sensors indicating profound impatience. We are concerned with the Terran specimen you have inexplicably admitted. Our intelligence divisions have analyzed its performance data from your Crucible simulation and combat assessments. The Imperator paused, letting the silence stretch. The specimen's methodologies are not merely advanced. They are philosophically unsound. They are a chaotic variable. Siege-Vorn's mandibles clicked nervously. Imperator, he is a child. An anomaly, perhaps, but he is a threat to the established order. Traxon stated with chilling finality. For millennia, galactic warfare has been predicated on a shared understanding of doctrine, of honor, of predictable escalation. We fight with discipline, with logic, with strategies that can be analyzed and countered. This ensures stability. This prevents conflicts from spiraling into mutual annihilation. The human does not adhere to these principles. It does not follow rules, it improvises. It does not execute doctrine, it creates chaos. We have run 17,000 simulations based on its combat data. In every scenario, its unpredictable nature destabilizes established military models and leads to catastrophic outcomes. The hologram seemed to lean forward, its synthesized voice dropping half an octave. We do not fear the human strength, Commandant. We fear his nature. Order is the bedrock of galactic stability. Unpredictability is the seed of its ruin. A warrior who does not follow the known rules cannot be trusted. The demand came without preamble, cold and absolute. You will expel the human specimen. You will turn over all data related to its performance. You will issue a public censure of Terran adaptive combat theory. Do this, and the matter is closed. And if we refuse? CH4 asked, his own voice tight. Then we will be forced to assume your institution is intentionally cultivating a weapon of doctrinal chaos, Traxon replied. And we will sterilize the source of that chaos to preserve galactic doctrine. You have one standard rotation. The choice is yours. The hologram vanished, leaving Sich Vorn alone in the crushing silence of his office. He sank into his command chair, the immense weight of the ultimatum pressing down on him. He understood the Vexler mindset better than anyone. They were not warriors in the same way the Cthar were. They were priests, and their religion was military doctrine. To them, Leo's unpredictable genius was not just a threat. It was heresy. A heresy they would go to war to extinguish. That he, Commandant Sich Vorn, had wanted to play a joke on the upstart humans. Now, his arrogance had handed a fanatical empire a holy cause, and the price would be paid in the fire of their warships. The academy-wide lockdown plunged the sprawling campus into a state of organized chaos. Emergency klaxons echoed off the obsidian towers as 15,000 cadets were herded towards fortified shelters. In his secure holding cell, Leo Magnus was oblivious to the rising panic, focused instead on an essay for his comparative xenopology class. He was in the middle of a sentence, arguing that Cthar honorifics were grammatically inefficient. Suddenly, the cell door hissed open. Commandant Thorn entered, flanked by a full security escort clad in heavy combat armor. His stride was stiff, his mandibles clamped shut. Behind him, looking deeply uncomfortable, was the hulking form of Vortak, who had apparently defied the lockdown to bring Leo a tray of what the cafeteria called nutrient paste. Cadet Magnus, CH Vorn announced, his voice a flat, official monotone that failed to conceal the stress beneath. Due to escalating external pressures, you are to be transferred to an emergency evacuation transport. You will be returned to Terran custody, effective immediately. As he spoke, a crimson alert flashed across the cell's wall-mounted terminal. A synthesized voice, calm and detached, announced, "Threat update. Vexler Imperium fleet has achieved optimal weapons range. Hostile intent confirmed. Bombardment protocols anticipated." Leo looked from the flashing warning to the commandant's grim face. "The evacuation?" he asked, his voice losing its cheerful edge for the first time. "It's for everyone, right? All personnel will follow standard emergency protocols," CH4 replied. The evasiveness of the answer was a confession in itself. Leo stood up, his small frame suddenly imbued with an unshakable gravity. "That's not what I asked." He walked past the armed guards, past the giant Vortak, and stood directly before the Academy's commandant. "How many will die if I leave?" "That is not your concern, cadet." CH Vorn snapped, his composure cracking. "Your presence here has endangered us all." "I know," Leo said quietly, his gaze unwavering. "So how many of them will pay for my mistake?" The commandant was silent. Vortak shuffled his feet, a low rumble of discomfort emitting from his thorax. Leo held the powerful alien's gaze for a second longer, then turned away. "Then I'm not leaving." Before Sage Vorn could issue an order to his guards, Leo was at the cell's public terminal. His small fingers flew across the holographic interface, bypassing security notices and lockdown restrictions with an ease that was, frankly, insulting. He wasn't hacking the system. He was simply navigating it with an innate understanding of its architecture. He pulled up the Academy's open-source tactical database, filtering for every scrap of information on the Vexler Imperium. Fleet composition, ship specifications, weapon yields, and, most importantly, their entire unclassified library of military doctrine and battle history. The two Cthar warriors and their armed escort could only watch, dumbfounded, as the 12-year-old human calmly began to analyze the fleet that was about to obliterate them. "They're afraid of me," Leo murmured, his eyes scanning columns of data. "Not because I'm strong, but because I'm unpredictable. They think I'm a chaotic element that threatens their entire philosophy of war." "That is a correct assessment," CH Vorn finally managed to say. "Okay," Leo said, turning from the terminal. He looked at the commandant. and his expression was no longer that of a child. It was the focused, unnervingly calm look of a grandmaster assessing a chessboard. So what if we give them what they actually want? He pointed a small finger at the holographic projection of the Vexillor fleet. They're afraid I'll break the rules of war. So what if I follow them? Perfectly. Vortak finally spoke, his deep voice filled with disbelief. You want to fight their whole fleet? No, Leo corrected, a flicker of his old grin returning, though it was now sharp as a razor's edge. I want to put on a show, a demonstration, a perfect, by-the-book, honorable performance of getting my butt kicked. He saw the utter confusion on their faces and elaborated. Their fear is based on a projection of what an unpredictable human could do. They expect me to fight with chaos, to use tactics they can't understand. I'll do the opposite. I'll engage their fleet alone. I will use maneuvers straight from their own tactical manuals. I will respond to their attacks exactly as their combat simulators predict I should. I will lose, but I will lose predictably. It will prove I'm not a chaotic monster. It will prove I'm just a very good student who knows the rules. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the strategy filled the cell, sucking the air out of the room. It was insane. It was suicide. And it was utterly, terrifyingly brilliant. It wasn't a plan of battle. It was a plan of psychological de-escalation, using the battlefield as a stage. Vortak stared at the human child, his mind finally grasping the true difference between them. The Cthar saw a fight to be won. The human saw a problem to be solved. And his solution was to turn his own defeat into the ultimate victory. The command center of the Aegis War College was a maelstrom of controlled panic. Alarms blared, tactical displays updated with terrifying speed, and the Vexillor fleet's inexorable advance was a crimson tide sweeping across the main screen. Into this chaos, Commandant C.H. Vorn presented Leo's proposal. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Absolutely not, bellowed Instructor Primus Kalen, his saurian frill flaring with rage. The plan is tactical suicide. We cannot sanction this. You are sending a child to fight a fleet. Inquisitor Lyrael's melodic voice was sharp with horror, her energy from flickering violently. It is a violation of every moral and ethical principle this academy stands for. Our principles will be meaningless when this academy is a cloud of ionized dust. C.H. Vorn roared back, silencing the room. His multifaceted eyes swept over the terrified faces of the galaxy's most decorated warriors and thinkers. The Vexillor will not negotiate. Evacuation is impossible. The child has offered a third option. It is insane. It is unprecedented. But it is the only option that is not a synonym for massacre. He turned to Lyrael, his voice softening slightly. Inquisitor, you said yourself his mind operates on a different level. This is not a battle plan. This is a psychological gambit. He straightened to his full, imposing height. I am not sending a child to his death. I am sending a strategist to conduct a negotiation. The battlefield is merely the venue. A klaxon sounded, sharp and insistent. Update, the tactical computer. Announced. Vexillor fleet has reached final warning perimeter. Bombardment imminent in 47 standard minutes. The debate was over. Time had run out. So be it, C.H. Vorn said, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. May the ancestors forgive me. He keyed his command channel. To all senior staff. You have your orders. Escort Cadet Magnus to Fighter Bay 7. I want Chief Engineer Tavok woken and briefed. Give the human whatever he needs. Fighter Bay 7 housed the Academy's most advanced prototypes. At its center sat the XA-1 Wraith-class interceptor. It was less a machine and more a work of lethal art, a sliver of polished obsidian and adaptive alloys that seemed to bend light around its frame. It was designed for a single purpose: to be the fastest, most agile, and most undetectable starfighter in known space. Leo Magnus, now clad in a hastily modified flight suit that still seemed a size too big, walked around the vessel with an expression of pure, unadulterated joy. He was met by Chief Engineer Tavok, a grizzled old saurian whose scales were scarred from 3 decades of wrestling with experimental engine cores. So, you're the larva causing all the trouble, Tavok grumbled, not waiting for an answer. He slapped a panel on the Wraith's fuselage. I've recalibrated the inertial dampeners for your pathetic Terran physiology, enslaved the primary controls to a simplified interface. But this machine, he jabbed a claw at the cockpit, was built for veteran pilots with 4 arms and reflexes, enhanced by combat stimulants. It'll tear itself apart if you push it too hard. Try to turn faster than 40 GS, and it'll pulp you into a nutritional supplement. Don't worry, Leo replied, running a hand over the fighter's hull. I'm not planning on pushing it. I'm planning on flying it. By the book. Tuvok squinted his reptilian eyes. By the book? Kid, against a Vexillor battle group, the book says you curl up and die. I think they have a different chapter in mind, Leo said with a grin. He turned to climb the boarding ladder, pausing to look back at the old engineer. Just make sure the communications array is working. I want them to hear me loud and clear. As Leo settled into the cockpit, the canopy sealing him inside, Tuvok could only shake his massive head. He had seen countless hotshot pilots in his time, full of arrogance and skill. But he had never seen anything like this child, who was about to face a fleet not with fury or desperation, but with the calm, terrifying confidence of an artist preparing to perform his masterpiece in the cold, star-dusted void, the Vexillor. Imperium's fleet hung like a celestial god's proclamation of absolute order. 37 ships, arranged in a flawless geometric lattice of overwhelming power, waited. On the bridge of the flagship, the axiom of judgment, Imperator Traxon watched. His tactical display as a single, minuscule icon detached from the distant Academy station. It was the human fighter, a gnat challenging a star. A final act of primitive defiance. Traxon's second-in-command observed. It is illogical. It is arrogance, Traxon corrected, his synthesized voice flat. They believe one gifted pilot can defy a fleet. They are about to learn about scale. He gave the order with cold indifference. Engage. Standard overwhelming assault pattern, subprotocol Delta. Disable, do not destroy. I want the pilot for interrogation. A wave of energy lanced across space. Hundreds of plasma bolts and kinetic slugs converged on the tiny interceptor's predicted flight path. It was a storm of fire that should have erased it from existence on the bridge of the Aegis War College. The faculty watched the same tactical display, their collective breath held in a state of suspended agony. The approaching storm of Vexillor fire was a wall of certain death. He's not even attempting to outrun the initial volley, Vortax said, his voice a strained rumble. What is he doing? Then, the Wraith moved. It didn't execute a high-G, reality-bending maneuver as they had all secretly expected. Instead, it performed a perfect, elegant evasive spiral pattern Alpha 7. It was a maneuver from Chapter 4 of the Pangalactic Flight Manual, the very first evasive pattern taught to rookie pilots. It was clean. It was precise. It was utterly, hopelessly standard. The storm of fire washed over the space where the Wraith should have been if it had continued its course. But the simple, predictable maneuver was just enough to keep it safe. Vortax stared, his mandibles agape. By the Hive Mother, he's fighting like a first-year cadet. No, Inquisitor Lyrael whispered, her energy form glowing with dawning, terrified comprehension. He is fighting like a perfect first-year cadet. There is a terrifying difference. Inside the Wraith's cockpit, alarms shrieked as proximity alerts flooded Leo's display. His own mind, that quantum probability engine that saw 1,000 possibilities at once, screamed at him. Faint left, execute a plasma vent burst to blind their sensors, then slingshot around the primary cruiser. It suggested, dive into their formation, their point defense systems can't track at this range. Leo gritted his teeth, forcing his hands to remain steady. No. By the book. He opened fire. His own plasma cannons spat out a volley of energy bolts, not aimed at weak points or engine cores, but at the thickest part of the lead destroyer's shields. They were perfectly spaced, predictable shots that the Vexillor shields absorbed with contemptuous ease. On the axiom of judgment, the tactical officer reported. Enemy fire is ineffective, Imperator. His targeting is textbook. He is aiming for center mass. Traxon's optical sensors narrowed. This made no sense. It was either incompetence on a scale he had never imagined, or it was a trap of profound subtlety. He chose to believe the latter. They are attempting to lure us into a mistake. Execute flanking maneuver Gamma 9. Enclose him. 2 Vexillor cruisers broke from the main formation, their engines flaring as they moved to cut off the Wraith's potential escape vectors. It was a classic pincer movement, simple and brutally effective. On the Aegis Bridge, Commandant C.H. Vorn felt his hope wither. The Gamma 9 was an inescapable maneuver against a single opponent. There was no doctrinal counter in his cockpit. Leo saw the flanking run develop before it was even halfway complete. His mind presented him with 17 different ways to break the encirclement. Most involved using the two cruisers' own engine wash to blind each other. He ignored all of them. Instead, he consulted a holographic page from the Vexillor Tactical manual he had downloaded to his console. Chapter 6, Section 3. Responding to superior flanking pressure. He banked his ship hard, not away from the trap, but deeper into it, increasing his speed to try and punch through the gap between the two ships before it closed. It was the correct response according to Vexillor doctrine. It was also the move with the lowest probability of success. It was exactly what they expected a desperate, outmatched pilot to do. He is taking the bait, Imperator, the analyst on the Vexillor bridge reported, a hint of confusion in his voice. His countermaneuver matches our doctrinal predictions exactly. Probability of success for his maneuver, 12%. It is a trick, Traxon repeated, his voice now laced with a thread of uncertainty. He could not reconcile the chaotic genius reported by his intelligence with the disciplined, predictable pilot on his screen. He is conditioning us, expecting us to grow complacent. Tighten the formation. Force him into a defensive posture. The Vexillor cruisers closed in, their weapons firing in coordinated bursts. This time, Leo couldn't evade everything. A plasma bolt struck the Wraith's port shield, causing it to flare and overload. A kinetic slug slammed into the rear fuselage. Inside the cockpit, a console exploded in a shower of sparks. The ship shuddered violently. Port shield failed. The ship's computer announced calmly. Minor hull breach on Deck 3. Leo ignored the warnings, his focus absolute. He was losing. Perfectly. Beautifully. Each hit he took, each predictable move he made, was another brushstroke in the masterpiece of strategic failure he was painting across the canvas of the void. And on the bridge of the Vexillor flagship, the masterpiece was causing its sole viewer to question the very nature of his reality. The net was closed. The lone Wraith interceptor, trailing plasma from a dozen wounds, was cornered. Its port engine was gone, its primary shields had collapsed, and its fuselage was a patchwork of scorch marks and gaping holes. On the bridge of the Aegis War College, a funereal silence had fallen. The faculty watched the tactical display, seeing not a battle, but an execution. "He's finished," Kalen rasped, his usual arrogance replaced by a grim finality. "No ship can survive that level of damage." "He bought us time," Commandant Sichvorn stated, though his voice was heavy with the cost. "He has served with honor." Inside the rattling cockpit of the Wraith, every alarm was screaming. The air was thick with the smell of burnt wiring. The control stick vibrated violently in Leo's hands. His own mind, that relentless engine of probability, was screaming just as loudly. It showed him a dozen escape paths, a dozen desperate, brilliant, unpredictable gambits. Eject the main power core. The resulting magnetic pulse will disable their forward ships for 3.7 seconds. Use that window to dive under the flagship. Reroute the life support's oxygen into the damaged plasma conduit. The explosion will be chaotic, but it might create a path. Jettison the canopy and use the explosive decompression as a final, desperate course correction. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, every gift that made him who he was, screamed at him to survive, to fight, to be the chaotic variable they feared. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the acrid smoke stinging his lungs, and he forced it all down. He silenced the brilliant, life-saving voices in his head. His hands moved on the controls, not with the fluid grace of his earlier evasions, but with a stiff, formal precision. He was ignoring his own genius. He was choosing to lose. On the bridge of the axiom of judgment, Imperator Traxon watched the human fighter's final moments. "Prepare to disable its primary systems," he ordered. "I want the pilot conscious." But the Wraith did not make a final, desperate charge. It did not try to ram them or self-destruct. Instead, it did something utterly inconceivable. Its remaining engine flared, not in an attempt to flee, but to stabilize its damaged frame. The ship turned slowly, deliberately, until it was facing the Vexillor flagship. It held its position for a moment, then dipped its nose in a slow, respectful BOW.IT. Was the honorable defeat disengagement, a maneuver from the most ancient chapter of the Vexillor military code. It was a gesture of profound respect, a formal acknowledgement of a superior foe, reserved for duels between their own highborn commanders. It was a move no alien had ever performed or even known. Then, a transmission opened on a broad, unencrypted frequency. The voice was that of a child, yet it was as calm and formal as a 10,000-year-old decree. Vexillor Imperium. This is Cadet Leo Magnus of the Aegis War College. Your tactical formations are superior. Your firepower is overwhelming. I concede the field of battle. Well fought. A tactical analyst on the Vexillor bridge turned away from his console, his own mandibles trembling, whether from shock or awe. It was impossible to say. Imperator. He stammered, his voice barely audible. His final maneuver. It was from the writings of our great strategist, Vex Prime. The concession of the worthy foe. He brought up a new data stream, his manipulators flying across his console. Our predictive models. They were running scenarios on the human's final actions. They calculated a 99.7% probability that he would attempt a chaotic, unpredictable final attack. A berserker run. A suicide ram. Something human. The analyst looked up at his silent leader. Imperator, he is actively, consciously defying his own optimal survival strategy. He is choosing certain defeat to adhere to our traditions. And, in that moment, Imperator Traxon finally understood. He looked at the small, battered fighter floating respectfully in the void, and he saw the truth. It was a truth far more terrifying than any chaotic monster. The Vexillor Imperium had built its power on the idea of order. Their strength was their rigid adherence to a doctrine that could be predicted, taught, and mastered. They feared the human, because he represented chaos, a force that could not be predicted, but they were wrong. The human was not an agent of chaos. He was an agent of mastery. He had looked at their sacred doctrines, their ancient traditions, their entire philosophy of war. He had not seen them as rules to be broken, but as a system to be learned. And he had learned it so perfectly, so completely, that he could replicate it even unto his own destruction. The true threat of humanity was not that they were unpredictable. It was that they could choose. They could be chaotic when it suited them, and they could be flawlessly disciplined when that was the better strategy. They could master any system, any doctrine, any philosophy, and wield it as a tool. That was a power far beyond anything the Vexillor Imperium could comprehend. It was the power to not just win a battle, but to invalidate the very reason for fighting it on the bridge of the axiom of judgment. A silence deeper than the void itself had fallen. The crew of the Vexillor flagship stared at their tactical displays, at the single, battered human fighter floating before them, and could not process what they had witnessed. Imperator Traxon stood unmoving for a full minute, his mind replaying the human's final, impossible maneuver. Then he spoke, his synthesized voice, for the first time, carrying a hint of something other than pure logic. It sounded like all ships, he commanded. Stand down. Power down weapon systems. An incredulous ripple went through his bridge crew. Imperator, his second-in-command, asked hesitantly. The enemy is crippled. We can. The engagement is over, Traxon stated with absolute finality. He turned to his communications officer. Open a channel to the Aegis War College. I wish to arrange a formal diplomatic parley. Not with the Commandant. With Cadet Leo Magnus. The crisis ended not with a bang, but with a request for conversation. Weeks later, the political landscape of the galaxy had been irrevocably altered. Commandant Sichvorn stood on his own bridge, observing the peaceful withdrawal of the last Vexillor ship. A private channel shimmered open before him, revealing the face of Imperator Traxon. Your student did not defeat my fleet today, Commandant, the Vexillor leader said, the humility in his voice more powerful than any threat he had ever uttered. He defeated my certainty. That is a far more absolute victory. Sichvorn could only nod in agreement. The joke he had set in motion had resulted not in humiliation, but in a profound and humbling education for the entire galaxy. The ultimate proof of this came a month later, in the form of a new, pan-galactic directive issued by the Galactic Military Council. It was drafted with significant and eager input from a deeply changed Vexillor Imperium. The directive was broadcast to every military institution and government body that IT read, Directive 7, Gamma 4. Henceforth, all previous protocols regarding Terran military integration are rescinded. Due to the unique and paradoxical nature of Terran tactical and cognitive adaptability, no human under the age of galactic standard majority shall be enrolled in any pan-species military program. All future human applicants will undergo a specialized curriculum designed not to test their abilities, but to understand them. Humanity was no longer a joke, a primitive upstart, or even a potential rival. They had become a fundamental strategic puzzle, a species so alien in their thinking that the only logical response was not to fight them, but to study them. And on the distant, blue-green world of Earth, Leo Magnus sat at his kitchen table, staring at a textbook. A frown creased his forehead. He tapped his pen against a page of complex equations, a look of genuine frustration on his face. "I don't get it," he muttered to himself. "If x equals 7, how can y possibly be this complicated?" 4. All his intuitive genius, some problems, it seemed, were still beyond him.